So a pod gets created, it gets an IP, then it dies. A new pod replaces it, new IP. Now imagine you have 10 pods of the same app and they restart all the time. Which IP do you call? You cannot. That is the problem services solve. Every pod in Kubernetes is ephemeral. Pod IPs change every time a pod restarts, gets rescheduled, or scales. There is no permanent address. The system was designed this way on purpose. Pods are cattle, not pets. But applications need to talk to each other, and applications need a stable target. A service is the answer. It is a stable identity for an unstable set of pods. You give it a label selector like app equals nginx. Any pod that matches the selector becomes a backend. The service exposes one virtual IP called the cluster IP. Pods come and go, the cluster IP stays. So that is why services exist. They turn a moving target into a fixed one. Every microservice architecture in Kubernetes depends on this abstraction. Without it, you would be writing service discovery code from scratch in every app forever. So now let us walk through what happens when you actually create a service. One command, kubecontrol expose deployment engine x -- port equals 80. Behind that one line, an entire pipeline of controllers wakes up. First, the API server, it receives the create request, runs admission, runs validation. Then it allocates a cluster IP from the configured service cluster IP range. Since 1.33, this is GA and backed by an IP address object. Kubecontrol get IP addresses shows you every allocated IP as a first class object. The service gets written to etcd. At this point, the service exists, but no pod is connected to it yet. Now the EndpointSlice controller wakes up. It runs inside kubecontroller manager. It watches services. It watches pods. When a new service appears, it scans every pod in the namespace. For each pod that matches the selector and is ready, it builds a slice entry. Pod IP, pod node, ports conditions. The output is one or more EndpointSlice objects capped at 100 endpoints each. kube-proxy on every node has informers, service informer, endpoint slice informer. When the slice changes, kube-proxy diffs the new state against the kernel's current rules, then batches the changes into a single IP tables restore call. 3 nodes, 3 independent reprograms happening in parallel in milliseconds. What gets programmed? On each node, kube-proxy writes a chain, KUBE-SERVICES. Every service port gets matching rules in this chain. Cluster IP /32 port match jump to KUBE-SVC. Then KUBE-SVC has one rule per backend with statistic random probability. And finally, KUBE-SEP chains to the actual DNAT to a pod IP. One more piece, CoreDNS. Every pod's resolve.conf points at the KubeDNS cluster IP as its name server. CoreDNS has a Kubernetes plugin that watches services. When my service appears, CoreDNS now resolves my service.default.svc.cluster.local to the cluster IP. 3 controllers cooperated plus DNS and the service is live. Total time from the kubecontrol expose command to first traffic flowing, less than a second on most clusters. So now let us trace what happens when something actually calls the service. Kubecontrol exec into a busybox pod, then curl my service. 2 seconds later, welcome to nginx. Let us slow that down and see every single step. Step 1, DNS resolution. The pod runs curl my service, but my service is not a real host name. The pod's resolver consults its search list. It tries my service.default.svc.cluster.local first. The query goes to CoreDNS. CoreDNS has the Kubernetes plugin watching services. It returns the cluster IP. The pod now has an IP to connect to. Step 2, the pod opens a TCP connection, a SYN packet, destination cluster IP, port 80. The packet leaves the pod's vEth pair, enters the host's network namespace. The pre-routing hook fires. Step 3, the packet hits the KUBE-SERVICES chain. Every service port has a match rule here. The rule says destination is 10.96.something port 80. Jump to KUBE-SVC-XXX. The XXX is a hash of the service name. Now we are inside the per service chain. Step 4, the kube KUBE-SVC chain has one rule per backend pod, but with a twist. Each rule has -m statistic, mode random, probability 1 over n. With 3 backends, the first rule fires with probability 1 over 3, the second fires with 1 over 2 of what is left, the third is the final fall through. With 4 backends, the probabilities become 1 over 4, 1 over 3, 1 over 2 fall through. The math always works out. Each backend ends up with exactly 1 over n of the traffic, equal share no matter how many backends. Step 5, DNAT. The chosen rule jumps to KUBE-SEP-YYY. That chain has one rule, -J DNAT -to destination pod IP colon 80. The kernel rewrites the destination of the packet from ClusterIP to a real pod IP. The packet is no longer for the virtual address. It is now headed at a real pod on a real node. Step 6, the packet routes to the backend pod's node, traverses the CNI bridge or overlay, arrives at the backend pod. The pod sees a packet to its own pod IP, port 80. It sends back a SYN, ACK, normal TCP. The backend has no idea it was reached via a service abstraction. Step 7, the reply traffic. This is where the trick happens. Source IP is the backend pod. Destination is the original sender. But the Linux contract table remembers the DNAT we did on the way in. So when the reply comes back through the host, contract rewrites the source IP from the backend pod back to the cluster IP. The original sender pod sees the response coming from the cluster IP, exactly the address it sent the packet to. Connection works end to end. The pod has no idea this dance happened. So we have walked through the most common type of service, cluster IP. But there are 5 service types in Kubernetes and each one solves a different problem. Most content stops at 3. We are going to cover all 5 with real use cases for each. 1. Cluster IP, the default. Reachable only from inside the cluster. This is what we just walked through. Use case, application to application traffic inside the cluster. If a front end talks to a back end, both inside the cluster, you use cluster IP. This is by far the most common type. 2. NodePort. NodePort opens the same port on every node in the cluster from 30,000 to 32,767. Traffic to any node on that port gets forwarded to the cluster IP. And from there to a pod. Use case, local development clusters like Kind or Minikube, where you do not have a cloud load balancer to provision. NodePort is also a building block. Load balancer services use it under the hood. 3. Load balancer. This is what you use in production for public-facing apps. When you create a load balancer service on EKS, GKE, or AKS, the cloud provider integration provisions a real external load balancer and points it at the node port. On each node, you get a public IP. Real users hit it. Use case, production web apps, the browser to cluster ingress path. 4. External name. This is the type most people skip. External name has no cluster IP, no selector, no pods. It is a DNS CNAME alias inside the cluster. You define a service like my database, type external name. External name equals proddb.useast1.rds.amazonaws.com. Now any pod can curl my database and the cluster DNS returns the cloud host name. Use case, pointing in cluster names at managed external services. Your apps look up my database. The underlying address is a managed Postgres in RDS and you can swap the target without changing application code. 5. Headless, spec.clusterip set to none. There is no virtual IP, no kube-proxy involvement, no DNAT. Instead, DNS returns the IPs of all backend pods directly. Use case, stateful sets. Each pod gets a stable DNS name like Cassandra0.CassandраSVC.default. Peer discovery for distributed systems. Custom client-side load balancing, anything that needs to talk to specific pods, not a load balanced abstraction. So, cluster IP for inside the cluster, NodePort for dev clusters, and as a building block, load balancer for public production traffic, external name to alias managed services, headless for stateful workloads. Pick the right one for the job. Most teams overuse load balancer when cluster IP plus an ingress would do. Now let us watch this happen on a real cluster. 3 workers, we apply a deployment, we apply a service, then we look at what Kubernetes actually built. kubecontrol apply -f deployment.yaml, 3 nginx replicas come up, kubecontrol apply -f service.yaml, the service object is created. Notice the cluster IP 10.96.255.20, that is the virtual address. Kube control get endpoint slice, the slice is already filled in. 3 pod IPs, each one matched the label selector, each one was ready. The endpoint slice controller did this in milliseconds the moment the service appeared. Now we shell into a worker, iptables-dnat -l KUBE-SERVICES. There it is, a jump rule for our cluster IP, port 80. Follow it, iptables-tnat -l KUBE-SVC -xxx. 3 rules with statistic mode, random probability 0.33, just like we said. From a busybox pod, curl my service. The reply comes back, welcome to nginx. The kernel just did a DNAT. The packet went to one of the 3 pod IPs. The reply came back through conntrack, all in a few milliseconds. Now scale to 10 replicas. Kube control scale deployment nginx -- replicas equals 10. Watch the slice, 10 endpoints now. Watch the iptables rules, 10 rules in KUBE-SVC. The probability changes 1/10. kube-proxy reprogrammed every node. We did nothing. The kernel reflected the new state. And that is a Kubernetes service, a virtual IP, a label selector. The kernel does the work. It is not magic, just very well organized IP tables rules, plus 3 controllers, plus DNS, plus conntrack, all cooperating in milliseconds every time. If this helped, like the video, subscribe to Kubesimplify, and let me know in the comments which service type bit you in production. Next deep dive coming soon. See you in the next one.